Signs of the times. Though we are to be cautious in making specific predictions about the second coming of Jesus Christ, we are to be alert to certain signs that may signal his imminent return. Here's Gene to explain.
The whole area of prophecy, as believers, we're not too cautious in terms of some of our conclusions. But on the other hand, we need to really be alert to certain things that are happening in our world that will point to the fact that Jesus Christ is going to come and that he could come very soon. Now, it's been 2,000 years since this letter was written or this book was written. There were some people who thought it was all going to happen within the first century or the second or the third. So all along the way, there are indicators that can be certainly positive indicators, correct indicators. Some of them can be very false. And that's why we have to be cautious. But tonight, I think you'll see why balance is so very, very important here. Going into Revelation chapter 17, let me highlight a few verses here just to set the stage. In Revelation chapter 17, verse 1, and this really now is another vision, as it were, following the vision that John had in relationship to the seals, to the trumpets, and those judgments, as well as the bowl judgments. This is a break point, and this takes us now to a whole other concept and vision that John had as he was recording this. And this is what we read. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, and of course what we're doing here is finishing up, as it were, or the continuity is coming now at the end of the seven bowl judgments. And one of those seven angels came and spoke with me in John's vision, which must have been an incredible experience, if you can imagine. One of these angels that had just released one of the bowl judgments is now communicating with John in this vision. And the angel said, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the notorious prostitute who sits on many waters." Now, obviously, this is symbolic language. And later on, we will find out who this is or what this is. And also, when it talks about many waters, it's talking about many people. And in fact, the chapters that we're looking at, certain sections, interpret some of these symbols. And by the way, when you study through the book of Revelation, some of the symbols are interpreted right within the sections once the symbols are stated. In some instances, you have to interpret them from the Old Testament setting. In other situations, we're not really totally sure what the symbols mean. We have to speculate a bit, be cautious, but try to interpret it in the light of the whole. Now, here we have an interpretation of this situation that we're just reading about. This is a further elaboration in verse 5. On her forehead, a cryptic name was written, Babylon the Great. That's a partial interpretation. The mother of prostitutes and of the vile things of the earth. It doesn't take much imagination to realize that whatever we're talking about here is we're talking about something that's very evil. Something that's very wicked. Something that's very immoral. Now, if you read on and you come to the end of the chapter, we have an interpretation as to who this great prostitute is. And the woman you saw is the great city that has an empire over the kings of the earth. Now that tells you a great deal about this situation. A great city which has influence throughout the earth. Now, let me give you some interpretation here. Some actually believe this is a literal reference to Babylon, the great city that was built by Nebuchadnezzar and later captured by the Medo-Persians. If this is an accurate interpretation, ancient Babylon will be rebuilt before Christ returns to rule and reign on earth. Now, Jeremiah seems to support this conclusion in a rather definitive way in his Old Testament prophecies. I could give you a lot of these, but I'm going to give you some samples. For example, compare what he wrote with John's vision revealed and recorded centuries later. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look into chapter 17 and 18, and I'm going to give you some comparisons with the prophecies of Jeremiah, what Jeremiah actually wrote. And what we'll do is we'll compare what he wrote with what John wrote. And notice the similarities. Here's the first one. They both describe Babylon as a cup of gold. For example, Jeremiah 51:7, he says, Babylon was a golden cup. Now, he's talking about a little city. He's not talking about some mystery or some idea or some symbol. He's talking about a literal city. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand, making the whole earth drunk. And that, by the way, is a significant metaphor when you look at what this symbol in Revelation says about this great prostitute. The nations drank her wine, and there he's actually using a feminine reference to Babylon, a literal reference to Babylon. Therefore, the nations go mad. Now, if you just keep that in mind and you read through chapter 17 and 18, there's some interesting correlations there with the nations. Now, if you go to Revelation 17:4, here you see some correlation. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She had what? A gold cup. Think that's an accident? That John is using the same language here as Jeremiah used? I'm quite sure that he didn't have a scroll of Jeremiah when he was recording this. He is recording this by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, who centuries earlier had inspired Jeremiah to use the same symbol. She had a gold cup in her hand filled with everything vile and with the impurities of her prostitution. This is all symbolic language, but it really communicates. Revelation 18:6, you see, going into chapter 18, we just looked at 17, but in 18, pay her back the way she also paid and double it according to her works. In the cup in which she mix a double portion for her. In other words, judgment is coming as she poured out her impurities, so you're going to see a mixture in a cup that will double and judge her, namely this city, this great city. They both describe Babylon as residing by or dwelling on many waters. And note that John described these waters as I said earlier, peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. That's the symbolism. Waters refer to all these peoples. And in Jeremiah we read, you who reside by many waters, rich in treasures, your end is come, your life thread is cut. Now remember, Jeremiah is talking about a little city. He's talking about Babylon, talking about Nebuchadnezzar. In Revelation we read, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me. Come, I'll show you the judgment of the notorious prostitute who sits on what? Many waters. And we know that refers to people. They both prophesied that Babylon would be destroyed suddenly. And by the way, that's a very important thing to underscore. Suddenly. This Babylon would be destroyed. In Jeremiah 51:8, suddenly, Jeremiah says, Babylon fell and was shattered. Wail for her, get balm for her wound, perhaps she can be healed. This is a prophecy regarding Babylon, and he's speaking first and foremost of the city of Babylon at that time, but there's another meaning here. There's a prophetic meaning here. And when you get to Revelation, this is what you read, therefore her plagues will come in one day. That's sudden. Death and grief and famine. The city that's symbolized by this great prostitute. Another comparison. They both prophesied that Babylon would be destroyed by fire. Jeremiah wrote this. Babylon's warriors have stopped fighting. They sit in their strongholds. Their might is exhausted. They become like women. Babylon's homes have been set, what? Ablaze. Her gate bars are shattered. fire. But notice what Revelation 17:16 says. The 10 horns you saw and the beast will hate the prostitute. There you see the mixed emotions. They will make her desolate and naked, devour her flesh, and burn her with fire. Notice it says the beast. The beast there is referring to the beast that came up out of the sea, which is the Antichrist, which we saw earlier in our study last week. The beast, the Antichrist, this man of destruction that Paul talks about in Thessalonians. Again, in Revelation, we read, as they watched the smoke from her burning and kept crying out, who is like the great city? This is talking about this great prostitute. That's the symbolism. What both Jeremiah and John envision are almost identical events related to Babylon. We've seen that. However, it is also very significant that historically much of what they envision has never come to pass. It hasn't happened in relationship to those specific prophecies. Now, if these are correct conclusions, it appears the literal ancient city of Babylon will be rebuilt at some point in the future and have an evil worldwide influence. If you go back into the passage, interpret it as we've just interpreted it. Furthermore, this city will suddenly and completely be destroyed by the beast, and we read that in chapter 17, completely be destroyed by the beast prior to Christ's return. All of that will happen. Suddenly, it will happen if indeed John is accurate in his prophecy, and if indeed Jeremiah was accurate, and they came together and made the same basic statements. Now, the 10 horns that you saw and the beast will hate the prostitute, Revelation 17. They will make her desolate and naked. In other words, the beast, the Antichrist, and the 10 kings that are in cahoots with him, they're going to destroy this rebuilt city, if indeed the interpretation is accurate. They will make her desolate and naked, devour her flesh, burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts. God is still in charge of this, even though they're human and their evil endeavors. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his plan by having one purpose and to give their kingdom to the beast until God's words are accomplished. In other words, here we have a statement right from Revelation chapter 17. If indeed the prophecy is literal that Babylon will be rebuilt, just as Israel became a state, so perhaps this is an indicator that something is going to happen in the future. Well, we know something's going to happen in the future. And things can happen very, very quickly in culture, as we see happening around us even today, apart from that kind of crisis, such as the church being removed and all Christians removed from the world.